Like I said, I don't think that my skills are unique. I believe that we all have intuitive ability. I got there to the command center and they said that they were going to go search for him in the city the next day. And I looked up and I saw that same view. And I said, no, he's not there.
It has been a year of intrigue for Pam Ragland, who most recently helped to locate an 11-year-old boy, deceased, whom authorities believe was murdered by his brother. Now, that is the focus of yesterday's Final Edition segment, but in reality, her other story of victory over U.S. Bank is equally compelling. Ms. Ragland prevailed in a fraudulent foreclosure case. That's fraudclosure. It's very prevalent in the United States. Now, that case has exposed more patent fraud than I can even imagine as a former closing attorney. Now, I joined her this morning for part one in a series in which she will stress the importance of educating from the bottom up, using multimedia to thwart the powers that be in the banking and judicial economies and corporations. She will be discussing these matters in depth in her forthcoming book, appropriately titled Bankrobbers. Stay tuned. So folks, we're here with KingCast.net and Mortgage Movies, and I have with me today Pam Ragland. How are you today, Ms. Ragland?
I am fabulous, thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Now, the last year has been extremely fruitful for you in at least a couple of ways. Now, what I know is that what you did was you used your powers of intuition to help find a murdered 11-year-old boy, and I believe the authorities have largely credited you with that discovery. So I'm going to have two questions for you on that one. First of all, how long had the boy been missing before you checked in on it? And then second, what to you is the most remarkable thing about that whole event?
Right. So the boy had been missing since Saturday night, and I really was trying not to get involved in that because I was actually busy with the discovery for my U.S. Bank case that I know we're going to talk about. And so I really needed to get that done. We had a deadline. And my friend was like, are you going to help with this missing boy? And I'm like, I'm busy. And then she said he's autistic, and I work with autistic kids. And so I, at some point in time, I kind of tuned into it, and I got a vision about what to do. And
so when you say Saturday, by what frame of reference, how many days had he been missing?
So he had been missing. This was Saturday, and by the time I just kind of even focused on it at all, it was Monday. And then I saw this vision of him. And people have talked about this vision, but this wasn't the only thing that happened. What people don't understand about intuition is that it's like another language. So, and there's many different languages. So you're literally taking what's energy and translating it into words, just like you would take another spoken word and translating it into words. So everybody's not good at everything. But there were three different kinds of intuition that kind of led into that. So one is I saw a vision of him laying under this tree, but I didn't understand it because I was like, why isn't he moving? And I literally saw him by a house, but I erased that from my head because it didn't make sense to me. And then by Tuesday, though, he was still missing. You know, it had been 4 days. And I told my kids, I think we're going to have to go help with this. And we had helped with some missing hikers also in our own local area a couple months before that. So I just said, I think we're going to have to go end up helping. I had called the tip line. They had asked me to come down a couple of times. So I just went there knowing that I needed to go there. So that was one kind of intuition, is I just knew. I saw this vision, another kind of intuition. And the third thing that happened is I have kind of like this internal GPS that's built in that I didn't even really realize I have. But when I look back, I realize it's kicked in at several points in time in my life. So when they said, well, no, and when I said, no, he's not in the city, they said, well, the family wants us to look there. I said, I totally understand that you want to honor the family's wishes. I'm just telling you, he's not there. I'm intuitive and he's not there. And I knew 100% absolute for a matter of fact he was not there. Unlike sometimes I'll get a sense of something and I'm not 100% sure about it. I knew I was 100% sure.
Yes,
so then
yes.
they said, well, then where is he? And I thought, good question. Because see, I hadn't thought to ask that question. And a lot of this and in everything we do is asking the right questions. So I literally physically turned my body just 180 degrees from where the city was, and I pointed to this area behind this store that was the command center, and I said, he's behind the store. And it was dark, and it was a rural area, no street lights, and it was hills back there. I had no idea what was back there. I just knew that's where he was.
Sure.
And they said, well, we've searched, hundreds of times, and we've had, people on horseback. I said, I'm just telling you that's where he is. And I didn't know how far back he was, but I knew he was back there somewhere. So this fireman overheard me, and he said, if I drive you around, will you know where to go? And I said yes, and all of a sudden, again, my intuition kicked in. I didn't know until that moment that I would actually know where to go if he drove me around.
And then that's how you found the tree, and then your children found the
Right.
the head was protruding from the sand, from the sandy area, I think.
Right. And literally, it's funny because we didn't know it was his property. We drove around for a couple of hours. Now, 1,000 searchers had been looking for 4 days for this boy. They'd already been on the property. If I'd have known it was his property, I might have talked myself out of it. But I had no idea. I just knew we were trying to get to this particular area. And finally, the only way to get there was through this one property. And we asked for permission. The people were still up. And it turns out it was his house. But again, we didn't know. Went right up there, saw the tree. I smelled something. And we were trying to get to this one area where this tree was kind of like fenced off. And that was, my kids thought it was an animal, because the guy that was with me had helped in Katrina, and he kept saying, well, that a dead body doesn't smell like that. And I wasn't thinking it was a dead body. I just have this inquisitive mind where when something doesn't make sense, I have to figure it out. I'm like, okay, I smell something and I don't see an animal. What is it? Like, I had to know the answer to that question. And,
Sure.
Unfortunately, he wasn't. And, when I looked back, I actually had several times when I had a sense that he might not be alive, but I ignored it. I even wrote it in my journal where I get a lot of my intuitive information. I said, is this boy alive and should we help? So I obviously had an inkling about it, but I didn't pay attention. And that's the thing is, like I said, I don't think that my skills are unique. I believe that we all have intuitive ability. And, later on it was that we got, detained because they thought, how did they find them so fast? So we were detained, we were questioned. And at some point in the middle of the night, we were there all night long. The guy and I looked at each other, the fireman, and he's like, I think that was his house. And we were like, really? And then I'm asking questions like, who was in the garage? And, because I had seen the partner on TV. So if I had gone to the garage to ask for permission, I would have realized it was his house. But I didn't go, and the guy hadn't seen her, so he didn't know. Neither one of us knew. We just went where I knew we were going. So it's interesting because there's all these different levels. We could talk ourselves out of the things that we have a hunch about or the things that we have an inkling about, and then we don't go further. So like in my case, I knew certain things happened. And when I say I knew, I mean I intuitively knew. And then it's been, okay, how do I prove this? Because the court of law is all about the laws and proof.
That's right.
Yeah, you have to have the laws. You have to show the judge that this is the law. You have to show the jury that this is the law. You have to find the case law to support the law that was broken, that you can prove that this is how it's being interpreted. So you take that information and you go further. And what's so interesting about people like criticizing me or saying, this whole thing about intuition or whatever, is that we assume that just because something's in paper, that makes it true. And when we're looking at all this fraud, closure, that is not the truth. I've seen people lose at their trial because 3/4 of their documents were literally fabricated by the attorneys and by the bank.
Exactly.
Like one of them, U.S. Bank. So, we know.
Somebody that we suspect it was fixed to us. There was a single bidder for a home that was $200,000 under market value. And they were trying to evict me on Christmas Eve. And I'm a single mom with 2 kids, trying to evict me from a home that they didn't even have the right to sell. When they displaced me from my home, that being a single mom with 2 kids, not only did it displace me, it displaced my 71-year-old live-in nanny, who is more like a grandma to my kids, that it set my son into emotional turmoil, that he began gaining weight, having trouble in school, a lot of trouble in school, angry outbursts saying that that home base was gone, that home base had been destroyed, because I've come to realize that there's no possible way that the banks are actually going to come around and do what they should. So first, I'm going to start with my story. Back in 2008, I requested a loan modification because my loan adjusted up a considerable amount, and I was supposed to have a fixed rate loan. Upon investigating the whole thing around my loan, I discovered that my loan was actually forged and that my fixed rate loan had been swapped into a variable rate loan. And it was a variable rate loan with a really high adjustment. So when I reported this to what is now U.S. Bank and previously was Downey Savings, They told me that, oh my gosh, your loan is forged. Oh yeah, you told us, but I can see we didn't really do anything. Oh, we're going to have to investigate. And while we're investigating, don't pay your payment because we can't modify it, unless if you've paid your payment, and don't pay your payment. And they sent one of my checks back. And actually they sent about 4 of my checks back, and they refused to take my money. And they supposedly investigated the forgery on my loan, knowing that I had hired a handwriting expert and come into the bank and shown them that there were more than a dozen forgeries on my loan. And this is going to lead to some stuff I'm going to share with you at the end, because there are some things that you're going to want to do. Okay?
So we're here with KingCast.net Mortgage Movies, and we're finishing up the first installment with a trailer for the next installment, which will deal more directly with the U.S. Bank. And we're just going to take a quick second right now to ask Ms. Ragland, what are your first concerns, and what's your overriding feeling regarding the whole process that's ongoing now with U.S. Bank?
My concern with U.S. Bank, and really from what I see a lot of the big banks, is that they're not playing fair. So they're relying on the old rules of law that said that what's submitted is accurate and truthful, and that all we need to do is argue cases on the basis of the law. And the truth is that is no longer good enough.
Right, and they're submitting documents that have been forged in your example, and so many of them are the product of robo-signatures, because the originals, of course, we know are all sent off, and they've either been flipped and or allegedly deposited into tranches, into pools, and they're no longer available.
Right. Well, and even past that, the forgery and the fraud runs throughout what I'm seeing, all these lawsuits. It's not only from the initial origination of the loan into the servicing of the loan and the transfer of these loans, but then the foreclosure on homeowners, and then even after that, throughout the trial. So we're seeing cases where clearly what's submitted in the court is fraudulent and fabricated. And homeowners and attorneys also are not thinking that these are new rules, and they have to really look at every single document to make sure that everything is accurate and correct, and it's a true representation of what was actually there.
That's true. And of course, if you look at the rules of evidence, though, under these circumstances, original documents should be required. So to get around that, we know that they've made phony, fake original notes. I've seen cases with 2 or 3 examples of notes and mortgages that are allegedly originals, all 3 of them. So we see that occur too. But to wind this up quickly, again, as we spoke about earlier, there are 5 ways that the bank makes money off of the innocent homeowner in these situations. First, they flipped your note and securitized it, and they allegedly sold it to a pool pretty much before you even signed the note. Second, they get any payments you've made during the pendency of the mortgage. Third, they get a pay point again when you default and the insurance pays up. And then 4, they sell your home to a straw buyer, which happened to you, which probably happened to you. They sell your home to a straw buyer at auction. And then 5, let's not forget, they also collected TARP.
Right. Oh, absolutely. You know what I tell people is that I think when people really look at the financials of these banks, they ought to be really shocked and really ticked off at the fact that we gave these banks anything.
It's Enron all over again, and before that, it was the S&L scandal of the 80s. Those of us of a certain age remember that.
And let's not forget that the insurance company for these fraudulent loans was AIG, who we also bailed out.
That's right. Perfect circle. Ms. Ragland, it's been great to speak with you, and we will resume this tomorrow afternoon.
Okie dokie. Yes.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being.